Hello and welcome to part 2 of the interview with Prezleek. If you missed the first part, click on the link that I'm going to stick in the top right corner of this video. This part is going to be more focused on her artistic side, so both the animations and obviously the weekly comics, how she gets her inspiration from them and the origins behind it. I'm going to shut up and let her get on with the talking, so I hope you enjoy this video and I'll speak to you all soon. If we move away from in-game and go on towards your art, where did you start? What was your first memory of arting, I suppose?
Arting. Well, I've always done it since I was like a kid. You know, I mean, everyone kind of picks up like crayons usually when they're like kids, but I mostly got into cartoons in particular because I mean, aside from watching like Cartoon Network, so I watched a lot of the '90s Cartoon Network shows. It was like Ed and Eddie, Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog. So a lot of those era cartoons I grew up watching. I think they also showed a lot of reruns of like Looney Tunes and stuff, which I watched. I love Looney Tunes.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite
cartoon?
I mean, oh my gosh, I have so many. I definitely high on my list is The Last Airbender. I think that's many people's favorite, but it is a very, very, very good show. So Avatar: The Last Airbender. I love Gravity Falls. That's a more recent cartoon, but it's really, I think it's very well written, and it's also the art's really nice in terms of like how they stage things, and I think I like that they're not afraid to push some of the humor boundaries because it's like, oh, but it's for kids. But it's like, well, I think we should treat kids with intelligence. I don't think we should dumb down everything so much. I get it if it's for like little toddler kids, but you don't have to assume they're like, so dumb that they can't handle certain things either.
Yeah.
Like, I think providing content that you can still have content that's like quote unquote child friendly, but still be intelligent. And I will firmly believe that that's for as long as I keep making art. Because like that's going on that. Aside from cartoons, I read a lot of comics. Unsurprisingly.
But
a lot of those comics were Calvin and Hobbes and Asterix. A big surprise there.
Okay, yeah.
And Tintin. So those were my big three: was Asterix, Tintin, and Calvin and Hobbes. And they're not like super child pandering, but they actually can have moments that they're quite sophisticated. But that's kind of why I'm thinking content like this would be cool for kids. They're fun adventure stories, but it's also like it makes them, it makes you think a little bit. It's assuming that you can, even if you don't necessarily get it right away, you can still at least like maybe incentivize you to look it up or something, or ask your parents.
Kind of that world experience in some aspects as well.
Yeah. But I absolutely love those three comics because they're all quote unquote child friendly, but they're fun. They have a lot of universal appeal, I think is the best way I can put it. Like even as an adult, I can still read these stuff and still enjoy it. Rather than being like, oh, why did I like this? It's so mind-numbingly dull.
I think in the attic above me, I still have a few Tintin books because that was and I occasionally read Asterisk and Obelisk is the round guy. Yeah.
Yes, Asterix and Obelix. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading a couple. I watched the Tintin film a few years ago, the Spielberg one based off of
the comics. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I did like how they had an homage to the comics at one point when there was a caricature artist. So they actually made the caricature artist a caricature of the cartoonist Hergé. I actually can't say his name because he's I believe he's Belgian, but I think it's Hergé.
Yeah.
But he was drawing. I think because there was like Thompson and Thompson, the two policemen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They were sitting to get their caricature drawn, and he was just drawing them in the style. And I was like, "That's great. That's really great." It's a small thing in the background, but that made my
It's just those
watching the film worth it.
Yeah, all those little hidden details that sometimes people
Yeah.
get. And I mean, is that something that you try to include in your art? Those little details?
Sometimes. Like, I'll sometimes try to. Most commonly, it's usually in the form of, like, books, but it's usually, like, so, like, Baroo might be reading a book, and it's usually a parody of some famous piece of literature,
Hmm.
or if it's related to the story of the comic, I'll try to make the book fit the context. So, for example, there's one cartoon the whole thing was a parody of a scene from the Mean Girls, and Baru is reading a book called Queen Baroos and Wannabaroos, and that's because the original film was based on a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes. So I'll do little things like that, or sometimes I'll put in, like, maybe I'm not sure. I can't quite think of them at the top of my head
Yeah.
because there's so many. But I think
Yeah.
he has read the official in different. He has read the official trilogy because I know that RS has, like, an official book series, like, where there's 3 books by T.S. Church. So he's
Okay.
read those, which is a bit meta.
a, a very educated yak.
He is. He's smarter than me.
Uh, so where did Baru come from? What's the
Oh, so
origin?
that's a funny story in itself. So there was one comic I drew where he wasn't Baru, he was just a yak because it was just a common familiar and, no different than drawing a
Hmm.
guy with, like, malevolent armor or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think it was when Raids was released for the first time, when Mazcab was just released, and Prez basically runs in with his yak, now Baru, but his yak,
Yeah.
and he charges in straight ahead, but then he runs back the other way carrying the yak, being like, nope, 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 nope. But then a lot of the comments were like, oh, I love the yak. He's just so good. Because he was very expressionless. He was just kind of chilling.
Yeah.
So everyone's like, oh, I love the yak. He's not doing anything. He's just chill. So that's the first instance of, ooh, people really like the yak as a character. And then a lot of my parents like to follow the comics because they're just very sweet and supportive like that, even though they don't play the game at all. But they try. They just like to support because they're parents. But my dad, he's like, oh, I love the cow. You should draw more of the cow. Like, but it's just a familiar. He's not like a character, and he's like, but you can make him one. He's so cute. And I'm like, I guess. So it kind of started out as not a named character, but just more like an opportunity to put, like, as we were saying, background jokes. So, for example, Prez might be doing his own thing, PVMing in one comic, and then Baru is just in the background reading. And, like, it wasn't necessarily I was thinking about him as a character. I just thought it's like it'd be funnier than just drawing a yak standing there. I'm like, oh, what if the yak is just bored or something? So it wasn't
Finding
cognitive
ways.
thinking about, like, oh, that's in character for the yak to do this. No, it was just
He's
more of like,
just
oh, it's a background humor or something
yeah.
like that.
He's finding
And
ways to pass the time.
exactly. Or, like, he'll do, like, small things, like he'll give Prez, like, a thumbs up or something if Prez is like, how do I look? And then Prez or we'll just do, like, a thumbs up. Then just the yak will just do a thumbs up. And then a lot of the comments were just saying, I think the yak's my favorite character because he was just doing all this, like, background stuff, and everyone just loved the background humor that he had. So it came to the point that the yak, even though he was not really the main character, just his presence was adding a lot. And I was like, I really should listen to my dad and maybe just try to flesh him out a bit more. And then after that, just after comics, after comic, after comic, eventually, I think at one comic, he did get name dropped as Baru. So then ended up being a character. The yak was officially called Baru. And then I think as a joke, I set up, like, a mailbox to send Baru questions, and that ended up taking off because a lot of people, because I would draw a reply, I would, like,
Okay.
it would be basically at this point it was life through it's. You know how, like, there's a lot of those, like, life through an NPC's point of view on
Yep.
the player.
Yeah.
It basically was like life through an NPC yak on the player. Except it was, Prez, so he's, like, extra extra stupid. um, and it just kind of grew from there. And then it got to the point I couldn't keep up with the number of questions I was asking because I wanted to draw a reply to everyone, and I was getting so many. I was like, I can't do this and comics every week. This is way too much. But at that point, Baroo had been well established that it was not necessary to keep the ass box going.
Yeah.
So I just decided to just focus on the comics and just have Baroo doing what he does best and just being subtle but being supportive. Subtle but loyal.
So your journey to where you are like today with your art. So obviously in the intro we've shown a few of your older pieces.
Oh god. Oh boy, old art.
So how did you like progress? Like how did you learn? I suppose is the question.
Okay. Like I feel like I keep going on tangents, and I'm sorry for that.
No.
But I like I said before, I started drawing when I was like a kid because I got interested in cartoons and comics, and sometimes I imitate drawing them and things like that. But as when I was like in middle school and high school, you had options to take electives, and I would always take art electives because I did enjoy it as a hobby, and I liked watching a lot of like if you watch those like special edition DVDs of certain Disney movies, they'll say like, oh, here's the behind the scenes, and it'll show like the animator flipping drawings. And I'm like, that stuff was cool to me. Just seeing people draw, doing drawings, making drawings was just always a fascinating process to me. So I just did it constantly on my own. And like, a lot of, people be like, oh, I see you like to draw. For Christmas, I got you a how to draw book. So I would just use those to kind of like get myself drawing. But I only really saw it as a hobby for a while because the community I grew up in was very pro science, pro engineering, and tended to be like, oh, you want to do art? You can't get a job doing art or things like that. So I was like, okay, so it's just gonna be a hobby for me for a while, which is not true, guys. Follow your dreams. But especially now, I'll get into that in a sec, though. But then I did my undergraduate college. You could also take like general education classes along with your core degree classes, and I took animation classes. And a lot of my teachers were saying, "Wow, you really have a knack for this. Are you sure Are you sure you're in the right field?" I was like, "I don't know." And at one point, so I graduated with a microbiology degree, which is fine. I don't regret learning it.
Okay.
But like I was really unhappy in the field. Not necessarily like I dislike science, but it's just like the back of my mind, I because like during my undergraduate was also when I started doing the comics too, and realizing like I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed storytelling. I enjoyed trying to come up with situations to draw, for my characters. I enjoyed seeing like the reception and things like that. And I was like, and I mean, at that point, it was mostly just self-taught. And I was like, geez, what? And I loved animation. I love this. It was basically science and art combined, to be honest. But I was like, oh, sorry.
I've done a little bit of animation. I studied media production at college, and one of the modules was an animation thing. We had to do like a physical model and everything, and it takes so long.
Oh,
it takes so long.
It really is a science as much as it is an art form. There is so much specific stuff. I'll ramble about that in a second. I'm gonna go on a tangent if I don't stop myself here. But and then after I was doing my job, in the micro field, doing my own thing, my parents kind of took note that I was not happy. Actually, I'm very fortunate. I have very, very supportive and loving parents because they are actually the ones that stepped in. It wasn't me being like, "Bye, guys, I'm gonna run off and do my dream." So they actually stepped in, being like, very, very passively. They're like, "Hey, there's a university, in San Francisco that has an open house, and we know you like art. We can maybe just check it out just for fun if you're next time you're in town." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." So we all went down just for fun, and I was really inspired there. Actually, they also said, "Oh, bring your portfolio, bring a flash drive of your stuff, just in case, in case somebody wants to see it. You never know." And I did, and we went down. I was just really having a good time because it's just amazing to see, like, this is student work. It looks so amazing. And then there was, a couple of instructors floating around because they like to, talk to what the programs are like and stuff. And they asked to see some of my stuff. And they're like, "Okay, you have a knack for it, and you probably can get to what you want to do if you want to actually study a program. It doesn't matter if you did, in a science degree. You can do animation if you really want to, because you do know enough of the basics that you'll be okay."
Yeah.
And basically, I ended up after it took me a long time, but I ended up making in like 2017 to go study Master of Fine Art for Animation. So now I study animation professionally. So that's probably why there's a noticeable jump in my animation quality. But also, hopefully the comics look better. I don't know, maybe. But I think they look better. I know some people are like, "Oh, I like the old ones more." And I'm like, "Gee, thanks." But there is funny phases that you can see through the comics because, like, for example, in my first semester, they required you to take an anatomy drawing course. So Prez gets in like a lot of the 2017 comics. Prez is like really buff. Because I'm like subconsciously thinking about anatomy now because I've just been drawing like all these like nude models like 6 hours a day. So I'm constantly thinking about like, oh, don't forget about like the deltoid is here and it connects to this muscle like this. And then, so Prez, he's supposed to be skinny. So there are a couple comics in like the early 2017 that he gets really ripped. And I'm like looking back at it now, I'm like, geez. What happened to you? He's now since slimmed down. He's now back to his cartoony self. So I always think that's really funny, though. But yeah, I guess you could say early starting out, it was self-taught, and then the more recent years, like I guess past year and a half, was professionally taught.
Cool. Yeah. And doing a weekly comic, do you have a backlog of them, or do you literally every week come up with a new idea and create it? Because
I used to do backlogs, but it got to the point that I kind of liked being able to adapt with what's going on. So, for example, if I see Reddit's on fire, I'm probably not going to post that week. So I'll be
yeah.
or if there's like a hot topic, for example, like, oh, everyone's really excited about this, this character, I might make a comic about that character, which you can't really prepare for when it's been backlogged.
Yes.
So in recent years, I've just been really busy, so most of the time I can only really make a comic on Wednesdays and Thursdays. I'll start drafting it on Wednesday and then I'll finish it up on Thursday, basically, so that way it can be ready to post on Friday. Because also it's in case somebody also this has happened a couple times where it's like sometimes I'll have a joke on backlog, but then somebody might post a meme or a joke or even a comic, because there are a couple new comic artists now that is really similar to the same punchline that I had drafted. I'm like, oh geez, I can't post it now. I'm stealing their content, which I don't want to do. So it kind of helps prevent that kind of issue becoming a thing where it's like, oh, you spent 10 hours making this? Too late, somebody posted a meme of the same joke. Yeah. So it's fine though. Like,
and like I said, it helps it stay fresh and relevant as well to what's going on. So
definitely. If it does happen, I usually just wait like 2 or 3 months before I share that comic. So it's not the end of the world. It's just like, oh, well, I don't have a thing to post this week now. But also sometimes I just need time to refine a script. So sometimes like I'll get an idea, let's just say, because I post on Fridays, and then I might get an idea Saturday, but it might take me a couple passes to get a script I like before I even want to draw it. Because sometimes what will happen is I'm writing a script and then I start thumbnailing it, and then I'm like, maybe the joke would be better if I rewrote it like this, and then I'll rewrite it and I'll send it to my friends for feedback. Then I'll thumbnail it again, and I'll be like, oh, maybe it'd be better if I did it like this. So it's a constant. I feel like I'm sometimes rewriting it enough that I can't backlog it, and then usually by Wednesday I'm like, okay, I have to pick something, otherwise I'm gonna miss this week. Which hopefully is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means I'm trying to make sure that what I draw is spent on a story or dialogue that hopefully has enough appeal for people. But
there's a whole lot of versions of your comics that people have never seen.
oh yeah, there are some where there's probably even 4 versions, or sometimes I'll have an idea but just never have the opportunity to get past the thumbnailing stage because I'm never satisfied with the script, so I end up resorting to something else. So I think that's actually, this might answer your question. I backlog scripts and concepts. I don't backlog comics themselves, but I'll backlog like ideas. So I'll write down an idea that I had, or I'll write down like a rough script that I had. And then if I need an idea, I'll look at, the stuff and be like, oh, I can probably attempt to draw this week. Or I'd be like, well, I don't like how this is now, so I'll draw something easier or something like that.
So, say it had been a slow news week or something, then you've got these other ideas you can go on that aren't necessarily relevant to what happened in that last week, or
yeah, for sure. So I think that's the best way to put it. Comics themselves are not backlogged, but the scripts are. And then there are some that are been backlogged, or dare I say shelved, for a very long time. Like they're there. I just legit have not been able to think of even a basic script for it because I just don't know how to yet.
right.
Or even when I try, I'm just like, it doesn't feel right. And then people are like, why didn't you draw my suggestion? I'm like, I'm trying to. I just can't think of a script.
It's not that easy.
It's really not. And I'm like, I appreciate that people send it in, I think, but then there are some who are quite pushy that they're like, hey, did you get my suggestion? Why didn't you draw my suggestion? I'm like, I'm like, I get so many. And I have to balance things. And I need to make sure that I'm happy with what I'm writing here. God, come on.
Yeah, it has to fit, I guess. You have to sort of gel with the idea, and it has to kind of fit your style as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it needs to fit the style. It needs to fit like what's happening as well. Like, for example, I'm not gonna post something controversial if things are controversial right now.
So,
yeah.
in terms of like your style, obviously you said it comes through a lot, the comics that you read. But have you got any tips for anyone that's like starting out to try and find a style, or would you say it's better to leave it and it'll just come naturally as you progress?
I think here it's kind of like a weird situation where I kind of want both, because it's like, I think one of the best ways you can learn to draw is to do what's called master copies. For example, I don't mean like okay, so if you like draw, you see a drawing of Daffy Duck and you'll try to recreate it yourself on paper. So that's called a master copy. You're drawing from what's considered masterwork cartoon characters. Or you might look at like concept art from Disney movies or Pixar movies, and you try to draw them yourself, because you're basically, what you're doing in your head is breaking down how these master artists created and drew these characters, and how they use shape, language, and expressions to get that level of art that you probably like. So to me, my advice would be, look around be open-minded to like different styles out there, and try drawing the ones you do like yourself through master copies. Don't stress too much about finding the perfect style, because it is inevitably going to change. Like look at Pikachu from how he was in like 1999 compared to how he is now. He's changed so much. Just because it's just inevitable. Characters just gradually change over time. Or if you look at a character like Garfield the cat, how he was in like 1978, he looks really different today. He's like this anthropomorphic cartoon cat, while it's in 1978 he was more like a legitimate cat. So I think it's just basically by doing master copies, you're absorbing information, but then when you're drawing your own style, you'll basically subconsciously be outputting what you do like, and it'll kind of start to naturally gel together as you go forward. So that was I don't know if that makes sense as advice, but
I think so. Do as much as you can and copy the best.
Master copy to study, but don't stress so much about finding the perfect art style. Just keep drawing what makes you happy, I think is really the best way to put it. And you'll naturally find its course. I mean, even now I look at my stuff and I'm like, it's not really my style. It's more like a cocktail between Asterix and Looney Tunes, but it is what it is.
Everything is iterative, though, of something else eventually. So.
Sort of, yeah. And especially with like all these archetypes that exist, especially in this era of like, there's so much media, so much access to information that it's borderline impossible to be quote unquote like original in the sense of like you're the first one to do this idea or this thing. The way originality is now is basically through execution rather than concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because like I'll give you an example. Zootopia did not invent talking, walking animals in the society. They just executed it really well, which is fine. It's still a great movie, and it's well executed, and it's original in that sense. But it's definitely not the first movie to think of walking, talking animals, right? So that's just an example, though, because then sometimes you'll draw a walking, talking animal. Like, is this Zootopia? And I'm like, no. Or like Undertale, you draw a skeleton character. It's like, is that a parody of Undertale? I'm like, no, skeletons that can talk is not an original concept. Do you guys not know what Lucian is? Like, if anything, Jack existed before Undertale. But nah, it's fine. So, archetypes exist. As long as you can acknowledge that, it's fine.
So, obviously, animation-wise, that's kind of a completely different kettle of fish to learn. So, how did you get the interest in actually doing the animation parts? Where did you start with that?
Okay, so like I kind of touched on it before, but I didn't really go too far in depth with it. But going on like things that I watched that inspired me, aside from watching cartoons and stuff, it was the behind the scenes or the making of BTS parts of like DVDs and stuff that actually really got me interested. Because to see and these animators bring a static drawing to something that moves like a believable person was like, wow, that's literally magic. Like, what the heck? Like, it was really, really cool. But I realized even back then, like, even if you watch these people, you were like, yeah, you need to be like not just a professional artist, but you need to be a really top end artist within your field, and you have to make a ton of these really, really fast to get it working. And even then, you're lucky if you finish 5 seconds in a week. But then I saw something that was a bit more up to my speed as a little. I think because this was I'm in like middle school at this point when I started getting more interested in the mechanics of animation. So I was like 13, 14. And it was actually storyboarding. So they showed a storyboard of a deleted scene, and I'm like, well, this is kind of nice because it's like a comic book without speech bubbles because it had audio over it, because it's a storyboard.
Yeah.
And it was kind of animated, but not. So it was like, okay, you're basically providing like the key parts of the animation, but you're not spending all the extra stress to animate it. And I'm like, okay, storyboarding actually feels like it's reasonable. So that's actually why like my 2 or 3 early videos are technically more like storyboard, because I was really, really interested in it and I wanted to give it a shot. I think you actually put it in the clip at the beginning.
Yes. It's the very first clip on the intro.
Yeah. So that's more of like a glorified storyboard, if anything. But that was more me being like, okay, let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes. And I had the most fun with those projects. It was fun because it wasn't taking me like eons to finish, like, you know, how animations typically do.
Yeah.
But it was there was enough movement that I was satisfied with the storytelling of it. And I was like, this is really, really neat. You can actually get a job doing this, which is awesome. And then I was like, oh shoot, but I don't really want to tell my friends that I want to study art. So I guess I'll just storyboard as a hobby and then focus on, focus on my sciences. But
so
definitely how I got interested in the animation pipeline.
So how long would you say it took you to do either of the Golden Gnome intros? How many hours would you say went into them?
Oh boy, hours. Okay.
Just a rough, obviously. It's going to be impossible to say for sure.
I would probably. It's probably easy to say like at least 100. Probably not. Problem with that one is like I kind of wish I had a bit more time because I didn't quite get soon enough of a heads up for when the thing was sealed off and approved. So I basically animated it in like 10 days. So I was basically almost doing it like a full-time job.
Yeah, that's insane. That's so quick.
And even like at some nights I would have to work through the night because I need to make sure I hit a certain milestone. But I think it's also more me being really meticulous. I'm like on things I probably didn't need to worry about animating. Like I'm sure nobody would have noticed if Baroo wasn't flickering his ears, but I animated that anyway. So
it adds life, you know. It's those little touches though that people subconsciously notice. Like maybe if you didn't move, you'd be like, wait, something feels off. But because you spent that extra time to do it, it adds that extra layer of sort of reality.
Yeah, I think that's also why that's why Prez was puppeted the past 2 is because I actually prefer hand drawn because I do think it has a lot more life to it, and I can do it, and actually I'm working on actually a hand drawn short with Prez and Baroo that will hopefully be out soon, but the animation takes it's short. It's funny. It's shorter than the Dolan Gnomes video, but it's taking me significantly more time because it's hand drawn. But that's why he's puppeted. It's just I didn't. You have 10 days. You're like, okay, I'm not gonna waste time doing hand drawn anime.
Yeah, there's physically no way you'd get it done.
Especially when it's only one of me.
Yes,
a crew maybe, not me. No, but they're great to work with though. Like they're very, very encouraging to let me do my own thing, which is really nice. Occasionally there have been times where they're like, you might have to revise this part because it's a little bit controversial and it's humor or something like that. But other than that, they're pretty lenient on what's in this, on what I'm able to do with the characters in the shorts.
Okay.
I don't know, like it. Most of my, I will say this, I was probably okay. I basically had stage fright when the animation came on, and even both years, because it's like you spend all this time animating, and you're like, if they don't like it, that really sucks. Like it's like, geez, I put like over hundreds of hours into this, and nobody liked it. That's great. So that's usually where most of my apprehension is, not necessarily what Jagex thinks, but more what the audience will think. But I think people liked it. I hope they liked it. I have no idea if they liked it, but I hope they did.
I mean, I sure did. It was a surprise to see it come up. And great.
Means a lot. Like, it legit does genuinely mean a lot. Thank you.
If you had like one medium that you don't currently work in that you could work in, what would it be?
Plushie making or like sculpting, something 3D, if that makes sense. Something that involves crafting with your hands. I've always been fascinated by. I mean, sculpting is cool, but like the reason why plushies in particular intrigue me, one that not only is that really cute, but it's also like planning out a pattern goes really over my head. Like you're basically plotting out like the surface area of your your subject, and that always seemed confusing to me because at least with sculpture you can kind of like we blob it together and you can shape it.
You
You
can
can't
kind of
really do
see
that
it
with
coming.
plushies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with plushies you can't do that. You have to pre-plan everything, and it's really expensive if you don't, because if you cut the fabric wrong, or if you cut it too small, now you have to go cut it again. Oh, you cut up all the fabric, you have to go buy more. So it's like it feels like there's less leniency for error, and that's really really intimidating. But it also seems really really fascinating too, because there's lots of people who do this as a hobby, like Plushie Tongue. I don't know if you've heard of her,
Yes. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
she's wonderful, absolutely wonderful at what she does, and it just still blows my mind how she's like, oh, I was just bored, I had spare fabrics and I made this, and I'm like, what? I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. No, I'm always impressed by people that can do anything relating to plushies or like fabric related crafts, because
The amount of planning that
I
goes
can't
on.
wrap
Yeah.
the time for pre-planning, and I still can't wrap my head around how it becomes what it is. And it's so also it's so impressive to me. I don't know what else to say.
A bit of a self question. Do you have a favorite piece you've ever done?
That I've ever done,
Yeah.
like for my own art.
Yeah.
Probably the Baroo's brothers.
Okay.
I feel like it's because it's a parody of a really iconic piece of concept art that Jagex put out back in like 2006, 2007. So it's recognizable across both old school and RS3
Mm.
communities, but it's also got, they're all yaks, so it's like it's got that quirkiness of not just Jagex humor, but hopefully a little bit of my own quirky humor.
Yeah.
And also, you can never go wrong with Baroo. He's swell. Like, even if you don't play the game, it's just funny to see a bunch of armored yaks lined up like that. So I think it has more of an edge over a lot of my other stuff in terms of universal appeal, because it just
Yeah.
has humor even without knowing where it's from. I want to get that printed for myself one day.
So, and how do you like work as a community? I guess a community of sort of RuneScape artists. Because I spoke to Zadie the other week, and she was saying you're always sort of on Discord sending stuff back and forth. Would you add anything
Who do
to
I send it
that?
to?
Well, not necessarily who or like how you communicate, and sort of I guess yeah, you kind of touched it already. The process you go through, just sending it feedback to people and stuff, but sort of how the community works together, I guess. And
Yeah, I mean, usually it's just pretty back and forth, as if it's casual conversation. Like, I'll just be like, I mean, it's usually in DMs, at least before the art server, but I would just basically DM my friends and they'll be like, hey, I wrote this script. Can you give me your opinion on this? Do you feel anything's different? And then I'll send this separately to different people that I trust. They're usually just really close friends of mine. I also send it to my dad, but he doesn't always get it. So he'll be like, sometimes he'll just be honest and be like, I don't play the game enough to understand this. I don't think you'll probably have to ask your friends.
yeah,
But then they'll be honest and they'll be like, well, I think it'd be funnier if you change this panel, or they'd be like, oh, I like the second draft more than the first one, or things like that. in later years, like after servers started to grow and things like that, it's a lot easier to get consultation because it's more open forum style.
Yeah.
And I might. The only exception that I'll do now is if I do put it in like an open forum area, I'll tag it as a spoiler because I had it once where I put it out in the open. So I'm like, no, I don't want to know what you're posting. And then I was like, oh, okay. So I have to. That's the only thing at least for me personally, have to be wary of is I have to tag it as spoiler content for whatever weekly comic I'm doing that week, which is actually kind of, I guess, in a way, a compliment indirectly in that they like my content so much that they don't want to be spoiled by it, even through the feedback process. So
All right. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything that I had. I'm imagining this has been split up into 2 parts because this has been over an hour long.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's not something to be sorry about. Like you can talk about your stuff with such passion, and it's great to see. So,
oh man,
have you got anyone you want to shout out or anything you want to plug?
I mean, I already kind of shouted out the art Discord, so I'm not really sure what to say. I guess all my friends and all my readers for being absolutely wonderful. Like I said before, I genuinely mean to when I say I owe you guys more than I think you guys. You guys say like, "Oh, I owe you for all the comics." No, I owe you guys. Really, genuinely mean that. That's really all I have to say.
I was going to say I'm going to end on that. That's
All right, cool.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it was really, really fun. Thank you for letting me ramble for an hour.